Hi everyone, welcome to Teacher Talk. This is the focus today is on maths. My name is John and it's good to be with you. We've had a little break because of the holiday, but now we're back into term 2. And so let's start to think about what we can do in term 2 differently from what we've done in term 1. And so first of all, I want to take you through the process of what we're doing on LearnExtra. Remember that there are resources available and there are broadcasts available for your learners, and I'd like to show those to you. So let's start with that. We go to the LearnExtra schedule. This is available on the website as well, but just to point out that at 4 o'clock today we have a live show for grade 10s. We're focusing on mathematics, and at 5 o'clock it's a live show with grade 11s, and at 6 o'clock it's the grade 12s turn. Now, on the weekend, we also have LearnExtra, and LearnExtra takes place on Saturday for the grade 12s. These are pre-recorded sessions dealing with work on a revision basis. There are notes as well for learners to download from 9 until 10:30. There are DVDs of this that you can order as well. Then on Saturday afternoon, the maths time slot is from 3 o'clock until 4 o'clock. On Sunday, this Sunday, we're dealing with grade 10s. The time slots are exactly the same from 9 o'clock until 10:30, and a repeat at 3 o'clock until 4 o'clock on those topics. Now, we'd like to make this show as interactive. All our learner materials, make them interactive so that we can get comment from you and from learners. So let's make sure that we go there. So to do that, you can contact us in different ways. The telephone number to dial, it's the same number for everyone, 086 1058 262. The email address is helpdesk@learnextra.co.za. And then our Facebook page for learners is facebook.com/LearnExtra. But for teachers, we have a special page, which is LearnExtra Teacher Talk. I'd like to go to that and just mention to you that there are a whole lot of things happening on the Teacher Talk page. Notice that it has a new format. This is a Facebook change, but you'll be able to post on the page. You will see that there are a couple of things. It even tells you what we're going to be dealing with today. We're dealing with topics from term 2, and we're asking for your ideas about functions, how you teach functions. Maybe you've got a special worksheet, a way of teaching functions. Please, won't you post that, give us a link to it as well. The other important thing on the Facebook page that you will have noticed is right over here. There is a link to the exam timetable. Now, if you're a grade 12 teacher, you want to be able to let your learners know when they're going to be writing their final exams in October and November. Go to the link and it'll take you to the Department of Basic Education's website, where you can download the exam timetable, know exactly when they're going to be writing. So that's the overview for LearnExtra. Now, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the topics that are going to be covered in the second term. And those topics, there are a host of resources that you might not be aware of that are available on the Learn website. And we'd like to take you through a couple of those and talk about the teaching methodology and approach to teaching some of those topics. But we're going to go to a break first of all. Don't go too far. We'll be back straight after that break. Colleagues, welcome back. This is LearnExtra Teacher Talk. My name is John. Today we're focusing, like we do every Monday, on the teaching of mathematics. And Teacher Talk is there to share ideas and to interview different people that have ideas. So we're wanting to encourage you to participate. We do want to take your posts from Facebook. That's the one place where we can get your comments coming in. So please go to our LearnExtra Teacher Talk page. We were on it just a little while ago, but we'd love to see that growing and like to hear your comments from that. Now, what are we going to do today? The beginning of a term, a little bit hectic, but we're settling down into seeing what's coming. The second term is always a busy term in terms of we're expecting exams at the end of the term as well. But what resources are there available that will assist you in being able to liven up the classroom environment, engage your learners, prepare them better for those exams, and perhaps do something different in your classroom as well? So let's have a look at the topics that are laid down specifically for grade 10 on the second term. And if we look at the CAPS document, we'll go to that in a second, but you'll notice that we start off with functions and then we move into Euclidean geometry. Now, to just take us to the CAPS document, you can see it here. I've opened it up, and if you have a look, you'll see that in terms of CAPS, we've got 4 weeks of functions. There we are. We're in week 2 at the moment, and we're looking at this very important section of functions, and then we'll flick over to trigonometrical functions, followed by 3 weeks of Euclidean geometry. Then we get into preparing for the mid-year examination period, and that will cover the 11 weeks of term 2. It might seem that it's quite a long term, but it's the same length as term 1, also 11 weeks, but we need to recognize there's lots to fit in. And we're going to need to gain some time in terms of what needs to be done. So how can we do that? What are the resources that will assist us to do that? And I'd like to take us to, first of all, the resources related to functions. We're going to look at functions specifically for grade 10, but it's interesting to note if we go and look at the pace setters for the other grades, not from the CAPS documents, but for the other grades, you'll notice that functions is also a topic for grade 11 and 12. So have a look at the resources that are available for functions that are related to mindset resources. So that's what we're looking at, and we're saying, what are the resources? Well, where do we go to get mindset resources? We can go to 2 places. We can go and watch the channel, and we are broadcasting material that you could tape or record, and but it's also available in other places. It's available on our website, and we're also putting a lot of material available on YouTube, and I will go to those particular examples. So if you go to our website, either themindset.co.za/learn, you'll be able to get a whole lot of subjects. Now, on the subject of mathematics, you will be able to click over here to get the maths subject topic, and you will see that it's broken down into data handling, functions, and algebra. I'll just highlight it for you. Over here are the key links, and you'll recognize those as the outcomes, the learning outcomes from the NCS documents. We've just arranged them according to that. If I go into functions and algebra, which is really what I'm wanting to do today, is to focus on functions and algebra, then you will get a page that looks like this, split into its various grades, and you've got a whole lot of things in grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12. Now, hopefully, you'll be able to see that although we've got lots of material in grade 10, grade 11 follows on, and so does grade 12. It links forward. There's a progression. What the CAPS document does from a mathematical point of view is to highlight for us really nicely what the building blocks need to be to put it into place. So we're moving from grade 9, what learners should know in grade 9, moving on to grade 10, building on that in grade 11, and moving on to grade 12. Now, while we're in the implementation of CAPS, the differentiation between grades 10, 11, and 12 is not as smooth. And we need to remember what is in CAPS and what isn't in CAPS, particularly for grade 11 and 12, and we'll mention that. So if you go to this particular page and look at grade 10, now what I would recommend recommend, although Introduction to Functions and Linear Functions, there's good mathematical teaching and solid material. The Study of Functions 1 and Study of Functions 2 are video series that are exceptional. They are really good in terms of summarizing as well as getting across the key concepts. You can use these in different ways. And I want to just give you an overview or a highlight of some of the ways that you could possibly use these videos. So if we go to Study of Functions, you will recognize that within the Study of Functions, on this particular page, there is a teacher guide. And the teacher guide is at the top of the page. It gives you an overview of what's happening in this particular series. The other thing that's in the teacher guide section is a little flash resource. We call it a whiteboard. It's a little program that you can use. Now, if you've got a computer room, or even if you've got a mobile phone that allows Flash to play on it, you'll be able to do a whole lot of stuff and get your learners to interact with us. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time just now looking at some of the whiteboard applications. If you connect it to a computer and a projector, you can have endless opportunity to confirm exercises and results that would have taken a lot longer. But let's have a further look at what's happening in this particular series. You will see in the Study of Functions 1, we start with the linear function, and then we look at the gradient of the linear function, the effect of Q, and then we move on to the other functions, including the quadratic and the hyperbolic, and then a combination of those. That all takes place within the Study of Functions Series 1. In Series 2, we look at the trig ratios and the trig functions and see how those change, applying the similar process. Now, I think it would be really important at this point to just mention that one of the things that's important and different in terms of the teaching of functions for grade 10 in CAPS is we don't need to worry too much about the idea of transformations. And the idea of transformations has been removed from CAPS, but the principle hasn't. And that's the important thing. So when we talk about introducing functions, we talk about changing parameters and having a look at how the parameters will change the function. So if we have a look at a particular whiteboard application, the one that was called transformations, and I look at this function, the straight line, I need to indicate to you that you can change the y equals mx plus c. I'm going to plot it, and it's plotted for you there. It's m is half and c is 3. Now, I know that's coming up quite small on the screen, but I want to show you the power of this program, or this little application, is that we can change the gradient and we can change the a value as well. So if I were to do it through transformations, then what I would be doing is saying, well, let me see what I could do. If this was the parent function, what's the family function if I changed the a value? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say, let's show the transformation, and I've changed the a value. And to even indicate that further, I can indicate the difference in the tables. Now, this isn't meant to be used on a big projector unless it's in a classroom, so it's not ideal for television, but I want you to see it's really easy to use this this little application. Simply hide the table and hide the transformation, and I'd like to do one other thing, and that's to change the gradient. This would be the alternative way of doing it. To say, well, instead of half the gradient being half, the y value being a half, which was there, let me change that y value, that m value at least. I'm going to change it by simply indicating, making the numerator 2, and now I've made it 4, and now I've made it 5, and now I've made it 6. And by going through a progression like that, you should have noticed, and I'll do it by changing it the other way now, by clicking on that function value, I've been able to change it, change the value of the gradient. And that's quite an important idea. When we deal with gradient, we can see that the steeper the gradient is, the bigger the value of m, the bigger the value of the gradient, the steeper it is. But notice you can also make it a negative. And I think that's also quite important. So I'm making it a negative value over here. I'm going to make this one, the numerator, the denominator, okay, so what I needed you to see there is I've just been told that you can't really see too well. So I'm going to just say to you, here's an application that you can try and make sure that you've worked through changing various variables, making sure that they got the sense of what the intercept value is, what the gradient value is. So let's move on now. And the next thing that I wanted to deal with is we've come to the parabola. And there is a function, a whiteboard application for a parabola. Now, this one will work, I hope, a lot quicker and a little bit easier to see. I'm going to just simply plot the parabola, and although it's quite small, I hope you can see that that's the plot of one parabola. If we were to change the value of a and make it bigger, and make it even negative, you can see that it's reflected around the x-axis. These are all interactive, and so really quite important that you can plug in numbers and you can get your learners to do the same thing so that they can begin to explore what's happening when we change various variables. The importance here is that the functions that we're dealing with here can be easily plotted. So they can plot them in a workbook, they can plot them and do the point-by-point plotting, but then they can compare them to these particular functions. Of course, we would like them to not only do the straight line, but for grade 10, there's the requirement to do the hyperbola as well as the parabola, as well as the exponential. Using Mindset resources, you'll be able to use both video as well as those whiteboard interactions to make sure that your learners can test themselves. They can explore the different values for the functions. So please be aware of that and make sure that your learners are very comfortable with changing the different variables of functions, and they can then be familiar with it. Showing a video can be used in two ways. We can either introduce a topic, contextualize the learning, and help learners to really get familiar with what we're dealing with. In grade 10 level, they really want to be able to recognize some terminology. And so I want to just suggest to you that it's covered in the video series as well, but terminology when you're teaching functions is really very important. And I would suggest both for grade 10, 11 and 12 that you get your learners to revise their terminology. They need to be able to take note of the definitions, and they need to become familiar with words that perhaps aren't usually familiar and aren't used in everyday life. And so we want to be able to make sure that at grade 10 level, yes, we'll talk about input, and we'll talk about output or outcome, output. We want to get a little bit more mathematical. We might even say independent variable, whereas the output is the dependent. Now, guys, we recognize that those terms are the beginning of understanding of functions. But when we get to grade 11 and grade 12, we need to be able to define the set of all the independent variables, all the values for the independent variables. And the values are going to make up the domain. So another word that is not very well understood, and the values for the dependent variable form the range. Now, domain and range aren't for grade 10, strict definition of those, but they are important for grade 11 and 12. And specifically understanding how the values of the domain can change, and recognizing the plotting and the mapping that is required is really important. Specifically in grade 12, where one needs to recognize that you're going to be introducing the idea of an inverse function, where the things that were the range values, those have become the domain of the inverse, and the domain has become the range of the inverse function. So recognizing this progression is really important. The CAPS document, although we're not going to follow it for grade 11 and 12, I think it does it really succinctly. It does it really nicely. So let's just have a look at that progression in terms of the CAPS document, and I will find the page now in terms of the key learning that needs to happen. And again, I just want to highlight some key points here, simply to say to you, remember to go to the CAPS document so that you can see that there is a progression that is required from grade 10 through to grade 12. And so you see, although we start with simple ideas, working with relationships, we end up working with things that are a little bit more complex. But take note of the CAPS document, have a look at it, and make sure that you're familiar with that progression. Because even if you're teaching grade 11 for non-CAPS, I think it's not a bad idea to get your head around what's required for CAPS as you're thinking about how you will change your grade 11 and grade 12 lessons coming up. Now, if we have a look at go back for a second to the mindset page dealing with functions still, you will notice that there is a key sense of lots of work in grade 10, but it builds up to work in grade 11. And I'm not going to have time today to go through what's involved in grade 11, but just suffices to say that there is a whole related section of work on functions in grade 11. There are videos there that you can go and explore, and whiteboard applications that you can go and look at. But what I want to stress for the moment is the grade 12 series on functions is a really good recap. Although it extends to grade 12, it helps learners to recap all the basic information they need to know, as well as does some transformations, so that they'd be aware of the translations, reflections, as well as the stretches and compressions that are required. So the functions series for grade 12 learners, I think, is an outstanding one. We're also going to mention that functions links to calculus, and that is a topic that is also required for grade 12s in the second term. Just while we're at it, I'm going to mention the important information about calculus that I think is really essential for you to be aware of. In our series on calculus, the approach that we've taken is not to just do a whole lot of drill and practice problems, but our approach to calculus is to find a problem. So it's a problem-centered approach. And the problem is a maximum minimum problem, where it's to say, what is the maximum volume of a box that is made from a piece of paper, made from a single sheet of paper. Now, this is an intriguing problem, and the series goes through how one folds the paper to make the box, and then looks at getting different boxes and says which is the maximum value. It's a really fascinating hook to get learners interested in finding the value for calculus. It also takes them away from the abstract nature where many textbooks approach calculus by a rigorous definition of limit and then move on to deriving from first principles and looking at graphs, and by that stage moving on next to plotting cubic functions, and learners don't really understand why they're doing it. And that's an important point to note. By giving them a problem that has the need for a solution, we're able to give some good justification for the calculus and differential calculus in particular. So although these video lessons in grade 12 take quite a number of lessons to get through the principles, I would suggest that you encourage your learners to download them, give them the opportunity to watch them, and if you would like to, you can order the DVD series on calculus, as that will really help learners to get the basics of what they require in terms of the calculus. Right, now I know that we've covered only a small section of functions and calculus, but it's time that we had a break, and so let's go to a break, because after the break we're going to look at the other two sections, the other two topics that are required for grade 10, Euclidean geometry, as well as for grade 11, trigonometry. So don't go too far, we'll be back after this break. Welcome back, colleagues. Good to be with you. This is Learn Extra Teacher Talk. We're back into term 2, and we really want to thank you for participating in Teacher Talk. We've had some comments from you on our Facebook page. Please send more comments in. We'd love to hear from you. You can phone us as well. You can email us. We'll be sorting that out as well to make sure that we get as much information from you and give you some suggestions of how you could use different resources in your teaching. If you've got some bright ideas, we'd love to hear from you. We're also planning to interview a number of people this term, so if you want to nominate somebody, send us an email of who you think would be a really good person to hear from, and we will try and see if we can hook that up. Now, what we've been talking about so far is about the resources that we have on the Mindset website which can assist you in your teaching for term 2. The topics for term 2 we noted cover functions, Euclidean geometry for grade 10, and we looked at that from the CAPS point of view. This is for CAPS. But we also noted that functions, trigonometry, and functions and calculus are part of grade 11 and grade 12. So recognizing that functions is important across the grades, we just dipped into functions very briefly and made sure that you're aware that there are a number of video series that you can use, either to revise with your learners or to introduce a topic. And there are a number of opportunities that you can give them interesting problems. Every one of those videos comes with a teacher's guide, and or series comes with a teacher's guide, and there are notes associated with those as well. All the videos have tasks, and the notes give the answers to those tasks. So make sure that you get involved and use those, so you'll find that your learners will not just be able to relate to the chalkboard or to the textbook, but you'll be surprised if they see it on a computer or they see it on a TV screen. They will relate and find an alternative way of making meaning of these important topics. Now, in term 2, as far as grade 10 is concerned, there's the reintroduction of Euclidean geometry. Now, I know that at grade 11 and 12, we're only talking about certain learners doing Euclidean geometry, those that have elected to write paper 3. And a lot of learners haven't had Euclidean geometry as part of their formal syllabus for the last couple of years. And I know that there are a lot of teachers that are feeling particularly nervous about teaching Euclidean geometry again. Even at universities, there are some teacher trainers that have not taught geometry or not even had geometry as part of their curriculum when they were at school. So they're a little apprehensive in terms of doing the teaching of geometry. But guys, geometry's been around for a long time. There's lots of help available. There are a lot of experts in the field, and we certainly want to highlight the teaching of geometry as one of the core things that we'll be looking at in Teacher Talk this term. So please stay tuned as we prepare for the teaching of Euclidean geometry. But first of all, what resources are there available? So when we look at Euclidean geometry, Euclid was a long time ago, but these resources are a little bit up to date. So if you go to the website and you have a look under shape and space, that's shape, space and measurement, you'll see that in grade 10, in grade 11 and grade 12, there are numerous resources for the teaching of Euclidean geometry. So where would we start? Well, there are a number of places that you could start, but I would suggest investigating geometry. There are 2 series of that, and then classification of triangles, properties of quadrilaterals. Those are the really important ones to go to. Now, we won't have time to show you the videos today, but simply just to show you where they are and to show you what the context of those videos are. The Investigating Geometry series begins really quite simply, and I would suggest that it is a very useful tool to go to in terms of making sure that your learners are on track. Now, I'm going to need to get that up because it's gone down, but while I just talk, make sure that we get there. We'll resume it as soon as we can. Remember that triangular geometry is, or Euclidean geometry is really a magnificent construct. And if we look at making sure that we've got investigating geometry here, you'll see that the topic covers from the world around us to reflecting on what geometry was around over history. So just have a look at this series, Investigating Geometry 1. You will see that the first topic is, and I'll just highlight that for you, geometry around the world, and then we start to develop, having looked at where geometry came from and how it's useful. And I think that's really the important thing, getting learners to understand that geometry is useful and it's practical, and it has not only practical uses, but that it can be a really good tool to stimulate thinking. And that's what we really want to get learners to find solutions by alternative thinking. What we've done then is to create a toolkit, a list of knowledge, prior knowledge, that we can structure and start to build the building blocks that's required for grade 10. And so we then move on to 2 lessons on the toolkit. We also deal with the important difference between inductive and deductive reasoning in lesson 4. We deal with the strange idea of conjectures, proofs, and show how these can be applied in dealing with triangles. So I would really recommend this series just as a brush up, even if you just watch it for yourself. So that you're familiar with what is happening. But I know that there are lots of interesting ideas that are explored, practical things that you can do in a group with your learners, so that your learners will be very clear about what Euclidean geometry is all about. So I would challenge you, go and get a look at those videos on investigating geometry. Now, when we come to the other aspect of geometry, Euclidean geometry, the starting point, investigating geometry. And there are 2 series on that give you the foundations that are really important for understanding what geometry is all about. But then if we look at the CAPS document for grade 10 specifically, what you will recognize is there's a requirement to revise earlier geometry and then to look at the midpoints of 2 sides of a triangle and to look at the properties of quadrilaterals. Now, in our series, our mindset series on classification of triangles, as well as on properties of quadrilaterals, we do something that's really quite interesting and quite unique to cover all of those requirements for grade 10. And I want to just recommend them to you because I think they're a novel way of carrying it out. In terms of the properties of quadrilaterals, what the developers or the writers of this series did was they said, well, what do we know about triangles? And they then took triangles and did some manipulation to them. And although we don't always need to deal with transformation geometry, the idea is still simple enough for learners to get a hold of. So what they did is they took a right-angled triangle, and they said, we know what the properties of that right-angled triangle are. If it was an isosceles right-angled triangle, 2 sides equal and the hypotenuse. And then what they did is they transformed it and they rotated it around different axes. And as a result of that, they produced a square. The square looked something a little different. The square looked like that, made up of 4 right-angled triangles. Now, I'm just summarizing this very quickly for you, but to recognize that even if we weren't going to do the transformations, if we were going to say, well, let's have a look at the properties of a square. What do we know about a square? Well, we know that if we divide a square, we could divide a square into 4 equal parts made up of 4 right-angled triangles. And on the basis of that, we'll be able to list the properties of the square. In a similar way, we can investigate the properties of the other quadrilaterals. Now, although this is a useful thing for grade 10s and it's required, as according to the CAPS document, please remember that for analytical techniques and for the grade 12s, they need to know the properties of quadrilaterals. And so making sure that learners, even in the higher grades, have gone over this theory is really important, specifically with analytical geometry, because they could get asked in the final exam, is a particular quadrilateral a kite? And if they haven't played with it, if they haven't gone through the principles of learning the quadrilaterals, the properties of quadrilaterals, then they're going to be at a disadvantage. And so even for grade 11 and 12s, I would suggest that this series on properties of quadrilaterals is an important one that learners take note of. Okay, now I see that we're almost out of time, but there was one last thing that we need to deal with. And that is, in terms of, before we go to trigonometry, and there's one last thing I really wanted to mention, and that was in terms of Euclidean geometry is not confined to grade 10 only. In our mindset series, we also have some circle geometry series. And now these haven't been broadcast that much, but I want to highlight them for those of you that may have learners that are wanting to do paper 3 and they're really struggling with that geometry. Go and have a look at the series on circles. It links really well to the Everything Mathematics textbook, which your learners have been given. So have a look at the series, have a look at the textbook, and that should help your learners. Now, what else can we note? The other topic that is dealt with in grade 11 is trigonometry. And so just to point out that there are trigonometry series that are available, and there are Learn Extra series that are available in trigonometry. Trigonometry is one of those areas for the final exams that we know that learners, that there are a high number of marks. So remember that we have for grade 12, large allocation of marks, a large percentage of marks. And so it's really important that learners practice their trigonometry. So when we look back at grade 10, we've done some trigonometry, basic trigonometry in the first term according to the CAPS document. In grade 11, we want to expand that and take that further and make sure that learners can deal with the sine and the sine formula, the cosine formula, and the area formula. The video series that Mindset has cover those topics. And so they do it in a really fun way, dealing with a practical problem. We've contextualized the learning and made sure that learners have lots of opportunity to interact. The importance of that particular series, the grade 11 series, is that it's contextual, has a context, but it deals with the practical solving of practical problem solving. Now, one of the things that we are very conscious of from the exam report is that learners seem to find difficulty with those 3D trig problems in grade 12. Not many of them are able to do them and get full marks for them. My suggestion, having looked at the video series for grade 11, deals with not 3D problems, but 2D problems. And the more proficient learners can become at dealing with these practical problems in 2D, they will then be able to break the 3D problem apart into 2D components. And that's really important. A learning strategy for your grade 12 learners is to make sure they can get the 2D really well and then migrate it to 3D. And the grade 11 series does that phenomenally well. Now, make sure that your learners have plenty of opportunity to practice this type of problem, dealing with sine rule, the sine rule, and the cosine rule. I know in the past we used to do some of this in physical science problems as well. They're no longer involved. So we need to give them extra problems in mathematics so that they can master these, as well as the area rule. Learners tend to forget them, and they need to be constantly reminded of these formula and the practical nature of it. Again, the video series does it really nicely in a practical way. My suggestion for you, even if you're not going to use the videos, why not choose a really practical problem within your school area and see if you can get your learners to solve the problem practically. Get them hands-on, get them engaged with either a calculation of an area or the length of a side. Make sure that they get hands-on in a contextual way. That will help them to be able to revise their trigonometry from grade 10, but also be able to use effectively their grade 11 trigonometry, which will act as a springboard for grade 12, where even more is demanded from them. So please make sure that we don't forget trigonometry. It's fundamental. I know that some people run away from it, and learners get their backs up as well. They have barriers to trigonometry. If they can engage with trigonometry on a really practical level, you will find that they are more accustomed to getting really great marks. Well, we're almost at the end for today, but I want to say once again, please remember our Learn Extra programs. Go to our website and you will notice that on Learn Extra there are a whole lot of resources and materials that you can go and download. There's also the story of Mzoi. He's an inspiration to your learners, so please make sure that they know about it, about his story as well, and make sure that they can gain the inspiration that is required to keep them going. I know that winter is hard and that times learners get discouraged with their learning, but if they can be inspired to do really well, then I'm sure that at the end of the day, all the effort that they've got to put in will be worth it. If you've got any suggestions, please remember our number to dial, 086 105 262, or email me and we'd love to chat to you, or go to our Facebook page. Now from me, John, it's been a pleasure to be with you again. We'll see you again soon. From me, goodbye.